Hey you all, Farmer Jesse here. So for several years now, I've been experimenting with growing edible mushrooms in our gardens, and my thoughts on this have evolved a bit. My original goal was to add some profitability and diversity to our, areas of our farm that are, well, usually not very profitable or diverse, such as the pathways and the shadier areas. I also thought they could work as a sort of interplanted intercrop. Plus, I just enjoy growing and eating mushrooms in general. And in some ways, that vision has come to literal fruition. And in other ways, it has sort of literally fallen flat. So today I'm going to focus on one of the more popular garden mushrooms and also touch on one of my trials I did this past year on another mushroom. I'll add some thoughts on the good and bad of mushroom production in the market garden, for goofs. So let's do it. Why does everyone invite the mushroom to the party? Because he's a real fun guy. No, that's funny. It's actually because he has really good taste in music. And he also brings these little profiteroles with like a homemade chocolate creme anglaise sauce. It's amazing. First things first, if you're not subscribed to this channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And if you are subscribed, you're awesome. And if you gain something from this video or any of our videos, you can always support our work at patreon.com/no-till-growers. All right, so I've grown or attempted to grow many different kinds of mushrooms over the years, from shiitakes to oysters to king Stropharia and almond Agaricus. Those latter two, though, are the ones I'm going to focus on today, as they are probably the most easily incorporated into the actual garden. Of course, there are many different ways to grow different kinds of cultivated mushrooms in and around your garden space, from bluets to turkey tail to reishi and so on. First though, some quick mushroom basics, because I know, at least for me, when I started out growing mushrooms 10 or so years ago, I had no idea what mushroom cultivation even looked like. I assumed you needed a chemistry lab and a college degree of some sort, but it turns out just about any old nerd can grow mushrooms. So for our purposes, that is to say for garden grown mushroom purposes, mushroom cultivation and production starts with mushroom spawn. Spawn is sort of like a sourdough starter. It's alive and it's able to be expanded and multiplied. We order our spawn from Field and Forest products, but there are other good suppliers out there as well. Field and Forest is just the only one I've ever tried, and they have always been, super helpful and have a lot of good information in their catalogs and online in videos and such. You may have a closer option to you, and I'm seeing more and more small scale mushroom people popping up, and that's great. So feel free to shout out your favorite mushroom people in the comment section, along with anything I miss or any insights you have on mushroom production in the market garden. So you select the spawn that makes the most sense for your purposes and follow the instructions of the person you bought it from. Do some research though. You need to know what kind of mushroom you're getting into and what kind of preparation it needs, and which again, it's alive when it arrives. So you'll need to make sure that you're ready to take it and you kind of know what you're going to use it for. For me, my goal has been simple. I want to use unused space or space that does not have a revenue attached and, well, add a revenue source. Plus, mushrooms are great at producing CO2, which is actually a limiting factor sometimes in intensive plant production. Yeah, that seems like a weird thing to say, but especially in the summer when sunlight and water may be plentiful if you're irrigating, it may be CO2 that stands in the way of you really having robust photosynthesis in your garden. So mushrooms can help provide a reliable source of CO2 to the carbon cycle as they consume their substrate and release CO2. Substrate just being whatever they are grown on, usually a carbonaceous material full of carbon, like wood chips or straw or whatever it is. So that's a substrate. Like for instance, my substrate is beer. When the fungi consume their substrate, they create soil organic matter and release any nutrients contained in a plant available form along with that CO2. These are saprotrophic fungi, which are different from mycorrhizal fungi in that they don't attach to the plant roots and consume plant exudates like mycorrhizae do, but rather consume woody materials for their food source. Anyway, I want to focus a bit on winecap Stropharia because that's arguably the easiest and most popular of these sort of garden mushrooms, though oysters are pretty high up there as well, just not as easy to incorporate directly physically into the garden. One note that if you do grow other mushrooms directly in the garden, let us know in the comments. What is your strategy? What varieties you're using? Those sorts of things. Okay, site preparation. You need to prepare a site. Don't go bonkers here. You don't need to do every path in your garden right away. This particular species, Winecap Stropharia, spreads really easily, so if you only want to start with one pathway, that's more than enough, because you can transfer the spawn from one area to another pretty easily. More on that in a minute, but to start, you want a clean slate of sorts. So a bare pathway that you plan to mulch with wood chips is good, or an already wood chipped pathway is fine too. A bare grass pathway, probably not so much. In this little demo, I'm using the already established pathways in my greenhouse last year. Greenhouses and high tunnels are one of the few places on our farm I do not use living pathways, and instead prefer wood chip pathways for those areas, so it makes sense to maximize that space, i.e. add mushrooms. And essentially what I do is in the early spring or early summer for fall harvest, I rake the mulch aside and then I wet it down really well. Then I sprinkle the spawn on top of the soil surface there. And then I rake the mulch back and add a little bit more mulch back on top. The mulch is just wood chips from tree trimmers, and this particular mushroom is quite voracious, but according to the Field and Forest website, soft hardwoods like box elder, willow, maple, and cottonwood are preferred. Hardwoods like... I hear you. Hi, kitty cat. Sorry. Hardwoods like oak work if somewhat aged, though softwood wood chips are not preferred. I gotta be honest, I use whatever my chipper brings, which is usually a mix that's very hard to identify. So far so good. Though of course it's certainly possible I'm not maximizing my yields or possibly flavor. Any yield out of the pathway is good for me though, so I'm good with that. You can also use straw, but it will be consumed more quickly than wood chips. So keep that in mind. It's not gonna create the mulch that you want, blocking weeds in your pathways for as long. So yes, rake, water, spread the spawn, recover it, and water again. Moisture is one of the tricky things with these. Mushrooms, like literally every other organism on the planet, need moisture. We, of course, don't really water our pathways here, but we do overhead water irrigation in the spring. Plus, we use drip tape out on the near edges of the beds where the mushrooms come up anyway. So that seems to be sufficient. Oh, and that's why the pathways work too. This is an important note. The mushrooms just grow on the edges and not in the middle, so you're not stomping on them, you know, like when you're walking through the pathways. Anyway, you could put drip line in the pathway if you really wanted to maximize that yield. So otherwise, then you wait a few months, a few warm months, and you have mushrooms. Then just refresh the bed every year with some wood chips so they have the food they need. It's pretty easy. Moreover, winecaps are a very prolific mushroom and can be spread quite easily by literally pulling up a clump of the mycelium on the base and simply using that to seed other areas. And you can also use just like the wood chips with the white mycelium over them. You just take that and then you spread it like you did before, and that's it. They take over really easily. But here are some things I don't love. First, though it is a rather meaty fruit, I find them shockingly bland. Certainly there are medicinal benefits to Winecap Stropharia, which is great, but the best flavor is when they are super young, before they begin to spread their cap. Pulling them young, however, obviously reduces the yield quite a bit. In cooking, the texture is not quite the same as, say, shiitakes, because they are very watery. So it's more of a soup or stock mushroom or sauce mushroom. I did make a killer jerky from them once, but you can literally make a killer jerky from basically anything. Also, they are not super easy to clean. The caps tend to pick up dirt and mulch quite a lot, and that makes getting the grittiness out a bit of a challenge. They also require a fair amount of shade to have that deep, rich wine color, so they don't work that well in the field because it's just generally too sunny when they want to be fruiting, and so they become brown and perhaps a little less marketable. Same thing can happen in the tunnel though, and well, until the tomatoes or cucumbers have grown up to a decent size. The fruit, by which I mean the mushrooms, will also stain greens with a big black smudge sometimes with their spores if they grow up, you know, against the lettuce or arugula or whatever it is, which can be a little frustrating. Also, I've heard people suggest they will help hold the wood chips in the pathways, and maybe that is true in some places with lighter rainfall events than we get here, but that has not been my experience. The heavy rain events will still wash out the established wine cap paths. Generally though, I do think wine caps are worth growing, especially if you've got the shade for the color. And I mean, what the hell else are your pathways doing? But in terms of adding profitability, I'm still a little iffy, you know, even after 4 or 5 years of growing them. But I will say that I got 15 pounds of mushrooms off a 96-foot pathway in the tunnels this month. So at what, $12 or $18 a pound or more, it's certainly an attractive option for using space that literally does nothing but cost labor. I'm personally still a bit hesitant to sell them because of the dirt factor and the flavor / texture factor. It's simply a crop I want to make sure that the customer fully understands what they're buying, because they can't entirely be used like most commercial mushrooms. So it's a lot of hand selling. Better for grilling or drying or soups or sauces, like I said, less so for sauteing, just have to make that clear. But in the right market, with the right production, sure, I think it's a crop worth exploring. I'm not going to spend too much time on the almond agaricus because I have only 1 season experience, but I did trial them last year, so I figured I would at least give you an idea of how that went. Almond agaricus is a mushroom in the button mushroom family. This family of mushrooms grow in compost. So my thinking, and of course the thinking of a lot of other much smarter people well before me, was that if we are using compost as a mulch and a growing medium, this may make a good intercrop. But here's the thing, or a few things rather. These are a fairly tropical mushroom, so they will only work in tropical conditions like the high tunnel and maybe not perennialize anywhere that temperatures, you know, drop below 40 degrees, which is here, even in our greenhouse, which is not heated notably. My understanding is that they can take some cold, but consistent cold will wipe them out. So for us at least, it has to be treated more maybe like an annual every year, even in our tunnels, which is a bit pricey. I think there's gonna be a loud vehicle. For us at least, it has to be treated a little bit more like an annual every year in our tunnels, which is a bit pricey to have to. Oh, my static aerated pile jumped on right now. This is exciting morning. I promise I'm gonna do a video on this soon. Still tinkering. So anyway, we'd have to treat them like an annual every year. That could be a little pricey, but could have the advantage of getting to pick and choose which crops to actually pair them with, because you may want them with your tomatoes and peppers, for instance, but not so much with your baby greens. Almond agaricus, like the Stropharia, is an attractive mushroom because it doesn't require a sterile growing medium like most cultivated mushrooms do. It just requires a good finished compost, like what you should be using, you know, your no-dig deep compost beds, and unlike myself, who sometimes uses whatever I've got. Anyway, for us, last year, we sowed the almond agaricus in the early summer in our tomato beds, and they popped up nicely in October. I don't know what the yield was. I wrote it down and I can't find it. Anyway, just read the instructions well, though, as you don't break up this mushroom like you do with the wine cap Stropharia. You actually just kind of break off chunks and plant those. We did that, and then we covered that with a fresh compost right next to our cherry tomatoes, which we needed to side dress anyway. So it's kind of a win-win. Now, one thing I will say is that these mushrooms are known for their medicinal qualities, but the flavor is a bit odd. I swear I actually do like mushrooms, like a whole lot. It is a bit almondy, the flavor, and it certainly smells like almonds, but it's just very pungent and sort of fruity. A little hard to pair, honestly, which is totally fine, but just something you would want to let your customers know if you were going to sell this particular mushroom. Teas and broths, and maybe mixed with other mushrooms, might be a great use of them, but it's a little odd. So anyway, if you've been curious about mushrooms, I think the wine caps are a good one to play with, especially at first. I love growing mushrooms. Seeing them, you know, take up space my plants aren't using is really nice. And I really do generally enjoy eating them. And as much as I am a bit on the fence about these two mushrooms, I hope that I have not poo-pooed them too much, as they are not hard to establish or wildly expensive to start, especially the wine caps, which are so easily spread. It's worth exploring. Both of these, I think. So anyway, let me know if you have any experience integrating these or other cultivated mushrooms into your growing spaces. Like this video if you like this video. Make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss me dissing the flavors of other things. Pick up a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, and when you do that directly from no-tillgrowers.com, proceeds go to making you more content like this. Otherwise, thanks for watching. We'll see you later. Bye.